Hey everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to today's plant clinic. I'm just gonna take a moment while everybody's getting signed in to remind you all of a few things about our webinar. And I'm sorry if you hear my dog barking. She's going a little crazy right now. Um, for those of you who are new to the virtual plant clinic, welcome. We're so happy that you're here. This is a Zoom webinar. So to ask questions during this class, you'll hit the Q&A box on your Zoom menu and send your questions into the Q&A. David will be taking questions periodically throughout the class, so I will relay those questions to him. I'm also opening the chat menu, and if you all have any technical issues, please let me know, and I'll do the best I can to help you all. We are recording this class, and if you want to revisit it, it's usually available about 24 hours afterwards on our YouTube channel. So I think that's about it for me. David, I'm going to let you get started so I can mute my microphone.
No, I have to say hi to Olivia. I haven't seen her in a while, but I hear her
She
back
says
there.
hello. A little too loudly, but she says hello.
Olivia will be our secret star today. She's in the background barking there
Oh,
a little
goodness.
bit. But yeah, good to see you, Sally, Olivia, and everybody else. Thank you for joining us today. So on our last couple of weeks ago, we talked a lot about fall color in terms of, the short days, change of day lengths, and bringing out different flowers, inducing flowers, fall coloration as far as foliage goes, and really focus there. So I thought, well, this time around, we're going to switch gears and I'm going to talk about evergreens. The evergreens really can't compete right now with all the beautiful deciduous plants showed in all their full glory. I thought, hey, they're such critical parts to our landscape. They provide that structure. They provide a lot of that foundation that's going to be with us year round. And so while they might be overlooked right now as all the other beauty of falls taking center stage, I thought, well, let's talk about because if you think about this, look around, it is a very good planting season, and you might want to add some evergreens to your landscape looking ahead. Part of my thinking is if we get them in the ground now, that gives them a little bit of an opportunity to get some roots established before it gets really full on in the middle of winter. And then they will be there to give you that evergreen color throughout the winter months. The one thing, and you hear me say this over and over and over, it's still really, really dry out there. I was telling somebody it was I was tired. I'll make my excuse. I put the sprinkler on, fell asleep for 2 hours, and I woke up saying, "Oh my goodness," and the sprinkler's running, it's running down the street and everything. But I watered for 2 hours, and then 3 days later, it was like the soil had sucked up what it could. It was dry again. So again, good time for planting, but particularly with evergreens, they need to be kept moist year round. So that means in the wintertime, if we don't get the rain, the sleet, the snow that we expect, then some additional water would be nice. Otherwise, great time to think about that. So I'm going to get started with a few pictures, and then as Sally had said, please send in your comments if it's any questions that you might have. Again, experience that you want to share, what's worked for you, what's not worked for you, so on. We really like to make this as casual and participate as much as we possibly can. So with that, yeah. So this is what I'm saying, evergreens, they serve so much value, so much function in our landscape in so many different ways. They can just be specimens. This is a picture from up at Longwood Gardens, and it looks like might be a big spruce back there, maybe an arborvitae in there. But these evergreens are providing a backdrop and a background and helping provide a little bit of enclosure there. And these are obviously some large specimens, as all our summer flowering shrubs and perennials and such in the grasses in the foreground taking center stage. This is down at Meadowlark Gardens and their conifer collection, again showing the diversity of these plants. So all the colors, the shapes, the textures that they have to offer into the landscape, so they can serve as a focal point as well in there. We also use evergreens extensively to create barriers, to create boundaries between us and neighboring properties where we want this little sense of enclosure, sense of privacy. We'll talk about this really in some detail today. And then here they see them where they're just sculpted into kind of weird, bizarre shapes and animals. So my whole point in this is just kicking off thing with Evergreens saying, wow, they do so much for us in the landscape. They have so much utility, function, beauty, and it's almost like the sky is the limit. Really, your imagination is the limit to what you can do with evergreens in the garden. But what I want to talk about, or the way I've kind of organized this little talk today, is I divided them into either broadleaf evergreens or the needle type. What will happen, let me say, is evergreens, they do shed their leaves. The leaves are not permanent, but right now, this time of the year in the fall, they will tend to shed their 2 or 3 year old needles or branchlets, and then each spring they grow new ones. So they remain green throughout the entire year, but they don't necessarily retain their leaves or needles forever. Uh, when I look at these as far as a broadleaf, these are in the group we call angiosperms. The broadleaf evergreens are the ones that actually produce a true flower and a true fruit. So this can be things like hollies, gardenias, camellias, azaleas, rhododendrons. The list goes on and on there, laurels, but they will have a true flower and produce a true fruit for you. The gymnosperms, these are plants that produce a cone. So you don't see all the floral parts and characteristics that go with that. They tend mostly to be wind pollinated that's out there, and then they reproduce by a cone. They don't necessarily produce that kind of fruit and flower that we associate with. Gymnosperms actually are thought to be maybe a little bit older. There's still a question about this, but they may have evolved first, and then the angiosperms out of that, or something as far as evolution of plants goes. But they took really two very different strategies as far as their survival goes. A lot of these needled evergreens, they have less leaf surface on them, so they're less exposed to the environments, which intends to mean that, hey, they're more drought resistant, and actually will adapt to a range of very harsh climates, but tend to be a little more towards drier, hotter climates a little bit. I'm contradicting myself because I'm thinking, oh, but then the great boreal forests up north, that can withstand the cold. So they really can work in pretty much any type of environments there. The broadleaf evergreens, because they have this flat exposed leaf and it's out there year round. Again, I just say they need a little more attention to making sure that they still get the moisture that they need. So I'm going to talk about conifers to start with, which really are things like the spruce, juniper, fir, the needled ones that have either this pointy needle or a flat scale-like leaf. So this is, again, that conifer collection that was down at the Meadowlark Botanic Gardens, just to kind of show the range of different colors, textures, shapes, sizes. Is really very, very diverse. And you can compose these things into these really creative compositions that are there. And this is year-round color that goes on there. Now, some of them will change a little bit with time, where they start to get a more russet coloration. I'm thinking right behind me, this one they call a fire chief arborvitae. It's an evergreen, but it goes sort of a light green in summer, and it starts to develop this reddish russet color as we go into fall. But it does retain foliage throughout the year. So we see here like the gold mop cypress, the blue spruce, some arborvitaes, spreading junipers in the front, kind of plants that you would typically find in landscapes throughout our area. Again, tough, durable plants. So one that I wanted to start out with is just talk about arborvitae, sometimes called the white cedar. I put this in first because it's one of our native evergreens. We don't have as huge a selection here in Virginia as we might like to have, but this is a wonderful native tree. This gives you an idea of the size and shape that will grow. If you look at my distribution map, you'll see they do group mostly in these kind of moister, colder climates, but they will come down here all the way sort of through the more mountainous regions of Virginia. So it is a Virginia native plant, but they are tremendously valuable to us in home landscapes because what happened while these were really popular, they do tend to get quite large, as you can see, and then they tend to brown out, get that little russet color in the cold months until a cultivar was developed that's known to everybody or has been very valuable to us. It's called the emerald green arborvitae. So this is a cultivar of our native arborvitae. And when I say that is this one stays smaller, more compact. As you can see, we're talking at maturity, this might go 10, 12 feet tall and 3, 4 feet wide as far as its dimensions go. And it has better color retention than the stray species, staying this sort of emerald green, as you can see, even into the cold winter months. So this brings itself down to where it's much more utilitarian for us in a home landscape because of its small size, better color retention, and can make a wonderful plant to create this kind of screening, this kind of enclosure, especially when you're trying to create a privacy and you don't have a whole lot of room to work with. So the plant names, I can't even say it. Smargid. This plant was developed, I think, in the Netherlands or someplace like that, and it's given a name, but then it is then given a trademark name often to make it just easier, more marketable, which then comes up the emerald green arborvitae. So the names are always crazy because we look at it and say, okay, it's Thuja occidentalis, but it's a specific cultivar. And then you'll find it on the shelf listed as emerald green arborvitae, all the same plant. And then sometimes it's called white cedar, depending where you're from, and it's not a cedar at all. So great plants, very functional and important plants for us. Again, used more for screening and enclosure than it is necessarily as a specimen. But like all wonderful, great plants, they do have certain pest problems and issues that we need to be aware of with it. So this is a real common one. It's called the bagworm that you can see. So bagworms, what they do is so over the winter, let me put it this way. So right now, this time of year, if you were to go out and you find a cocoon hanging on like this, if this was a male bagworm, he has exited out of there, taken flight, and mated and is now actually dead. If this was a female, she will lay eggs, and so that cocoon may have anywhere from like 100 to 300 eggs in there. So if you find these, we want to remove them and destroy it. Otherwise, it will go through the winter time, and next year, when we get to about, say, June time period, that's when these eggs start to hatch in this May, June, July time period, and they will go through, and as they eat and strip the foliage off of the plant, they can do this on arborvitae, junipers, even spruce, several conifers they go after. So if you find them on there now, the best thing is just to remove them as a preventative thing. If you were to encounter them during their active stage, which would be more like a May, June, July, then we can actually treat that. We've even got some good organic options for it. The other thing I like to make sure that we're aware of if we're planting arborvitae is it is a favorite for deer browsing on it. So this was a situation where they were as a nice choice of plant put in here to provide a closure and privacy between the two neighboring properties. However, they back up into this large wooded area. This is actually pretty close to the Bull Run Regional Park, which is several hundred acres of undeveloped parkland. So they had the deer out there and they put food out there, and then you can see right down here, it's a good example what happens to the browse line. They just come through and they can reach up to here and just chew them down from that. But you know, we were able to get started on doing some deer repellents, you know, maintaining that on there on a regular basis. And these plants will recover, just like the ones with bagworms. They'll recover. They've just been defoliated. And if we can stop the defoliator, whether it's a bagworm or a deer, it will grow back in and fill back into it. But save yourself some trouble if that's an issue. Just, you know, we'll look at other options that are out there. So that's our varieties of our American arborvitae. What came along, probably I'm going to say now, it's probably at least 20 years old now, probably even longer than that, was a hybrid where they took two different species of arborvitae, a Western arborvitae, and I can't even, this one I think is a European species, and they hybridized the two of them, right? And that resulted in a plant that's called green giant arborvitae. Green giant is a phenomenally popular, useful, utilitarian, beautiful, gorgeous plant. This is like right now in the evergreen world, this is like the wonder plant. Everybody that moves in with smaller properties and trying to create a little bit of a screening and privacy between neighbors, this foots the bill in so many ways because it grows really fast. You can see 3, even 4 feet a year of growth on these when they get going. They're, I'm going to use the word deer resistant. I have seen deer browse on them, but nowhere near to the extent that they do on the American or Oriental arborvitaes. And rarely do I find bagworms on them, but when I do find bagworms, it's a much smaller population. So here we go. We've got a phenomenal plant that provides us that kind of screening, nice texture on it, good foliage, pest and disease resistant. Again, little things can always happen, but rarely do they become a problem. And it becomes sort of the go-to amazing, wonderful evergreen for many purposes. And so this is what we get as it starts to grow and it gets some size to it. Now, green giant, as the name says there, it can easily go 30 plus feet tall with time, but they're very sort of upright in there. So they're going to stay 6, 8, maybe 10 feet wide. These things, whenever I talk about the size of a plant, woody plants are going to grow their entire life. Each year they grow, they grow, they grow. So it always becomes relevant to with the time frame that we're talking about. So when I'm putting a size of a plant out there, I'm looking 10, maybe 20 years, 25 years out down the road. Hey, if you're around long enough and you give them enough time, they may even get larger in sizes that I quote. But they can provide this really beautiful, nice hedge-like look in their great background. Another one that we use a lot is one that's called the Leyland cypress. Leyland cypress, also a very fast grower. 3 feet a year of growth on that is a very realistic expectation. They're tough, they're durable. You can see this, they'll withstand harsh conditions. They really do best in full sun. That's another thing. The green giant arborvitae is a little bit more shade tolerant, but a super sturdy, attractive plant. It's wider, so it needs more space. As it grows, it starts spreading out and getting wider than the green giant arborvitae does, but again, a pretty durable, functional plant. And when you get a row of them planted, like we see here at the Leyland cypress, you can start to really see the density they give, the enclosure they provide, and you kind of see where they're growing out wider, give you an idea a little more what the structure is going to look at on them. Now, the thing is, they said Leyland cypress, it can get some more pest issues in terms of one of the biggest things we run into is this Ceridium canker. It's a fungal infection that then, like I say, causes this branch to die, this branch to die, a little bit die back here. It will spread by the wind and splashing water to the next one, and then it's a branch here, a branch there. We don't have any controls for it. All we can do is cut out the dead branches. It's also a little bit more prone to scale insects, occasionally mites that are in there, so we have to be a little more attentive to that. But the deal breaker that came in is their architecture. If we go back, let me go back, you'll see how they tend to spread out a little bit wider like this. That means they tend to collect the snow and the ice. And as the snow and ice collects on them, it's not unusual to see where they become then uprooted, toppling over. And so it's been a while since we've had heavy snow, but it happens. And when it does, they start coming over. So this is what I was looking for. Here they are side by side. You can see the different growth rates, patterns, and looks that they have. Both nice plants, but like I said, everybody seems to be leaning towards the green giant because it will shed the ice and snow off of there. It never really collects on there. Just something about their structure. It tends to slide off of those, whereas on the Leyland cypress, it tends to collect and capture them. But those are some common ones that are out there. Another that I want to say is underutilized, undervalued in there is our own native eastern red cedars there, Juniperus virginiana. This is oftentimes what I call pioneer species, where it's one of the first that come into an area that's been disturbed. So if an area has been a farm field that gets abandoned or something, these will be some of the first ones that start sprouting up here and there. So they're super tough, super durable, and they are a wonderful wildlife plant. Their ecological value that goes into it, because there are male and female plants, but if you get the female, it produces the juniper berry. Which right now, if you look as a little, if you were able to see it, little kind of powder blue berries, they're very attractive. And so this provides food for birds. It provides a wonderful wildlife habitat as far as shelter goes, where they can nest in there and protect themselves from weather and hide themselves from predators. It's a fast-growing, durable tree. They really were dismissed throughout the industry for many, many years. Most, you know, as far back as I can remember almost. But now that there's an awareness of the value of native plants and the ecological value that native plants can provide, there has been much, much more interest, and they are now pretty widely available. And they're widely available in different cultivars. So one of the things people didn't like about juniper is because it will sometimes go a little bit brown on you. So there are varieties now to maintain a little more of a blue coloration to enhance and bring that out in it. I think there's also some varieties that might stay a little bit smaller. So we're seeing a lot of progress happen in that area. So again, this had a picture out in Meadowlark Gardens where I thought this was nice, where it was actually used as specimen, whereas more often than not, it is used kind of as a screening type plant, provide a little bit of shelter and enclosure that's in there. They are prickly a little bit. That's something that bothers us. And one thing I'll say that we already talked about a little bit earlier, believe it or not, this is a cultivar or a variety. This was called Fire Chief of the same plant. So what will happen a lot of times in horticultural uses, we get a mutation. We get what we call a sport. We get one of these that for some odd reason, it doesn't grow the same shape and size. It stays small, it stays rounded. This one is actually a juvenile state. It kind of stays in a permanent juvenile condition that's there. But that gets then, somebody discovers it, say, hey, that's pretty cool, cultivates it, selects it, propagates it, and away we go. So again, think outside the box. If you come into the garden center, you'll start to see we have these that come kind of yellow, this kind of red coloration, russet in there, rounded, upright, like I said, a little more blue coloration. Just a plant that I think really needs to find its way back in our landscape, largely because of the ecological value it provides for supporting wildlife. And they're just great horticultural plants. Changing directions on that, you can see here, Japanese cedar or Japanese incense cedar, not a native at all, comes from the other side of the world, but still a very nice conifer that can serve many purposes in our landscape. This, because I think it's got sort of maybe a little more distinctive texture and form, like we can see here, can be used as a specimen plant by itself. It can also be used to create screening or enhance that kind of a privacy. Lots of different varieties in here. I have one in my front yard, my little townhouse yard. It's a little small rounded one. It's been there for 18 years now, and I'm keeping it pruned at about 5 feet tall, 5 feet wide, in small rounded form. There's a black dragon one is a very columnar, upright growing. So there's a lot of variety within this group. One thing that will happen is they do tend to go a little off color, kind of this russet coloration in the fall or the winter of the year, but then green up and flush out this nice green and this soft texture. And it's also, that's what I was going to say, in the world of conifers, it is way more resilient in terms of pruning. One of the things that happens when we're talking about conifers, typically all that growth occurs out in the branch tips. So if we prune it back, that plant will not regenerate. It will not recover. So if we're trying to maintain them in size, We have to do that on an annual basis. If you go out of town, you go overseas, and you come back 5 years later and it's outgrown itself, it's really just gotten too big. We just don't have much we can do with that. This plant, though, Cryptomeria, it is one that you can cut it back, and it is oftentimes able to rejuvenate itself. And so it's a little more forgiving in that regard. Some people have done work with that, playing around it as a potential Christmas tree crop, but I don't think that ever really took hold. But hey, that doesn't mean it won't sometime in the future. Deodar cedar, another introduced one. These guys get big, so it's really a specimen plant. Could be used for screening, but it's grown really for this graceful texture that it has. Also, the sort of the light blue coloration that goes on there. There are weeping forms of this as well as the upright form that's there. But if you have space, because I'm not aware of any of these that really stay small, there probably are some out there, but this is one that might find its way also into your landscape, as an estate gardener or something, right? So those were all conifers that I was talking about: pines, spruces, firs, chamaecyparis, cypress, all those. I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch gears quickly to talk about some flowering evergreens, a little bit on screening, and then I will open up for questions and comments. So that's going to be coming up in just a minute. But we're switching gears to the flowering plants. Going back to the angiosperms here. So I put the southern magnolia in here because really what illustrates it better. I mean, gorgeous, beautiful flowers on gorgeous, beautiful evergreen foliage, and probably one of the earliest as far as plant evolution goes of the flowering plant families that's in there. So this gives you an idea. This is River Farm down there, part of one time George Washington's estate. So this is an old tree, but you can see here, easily going up 40, 50 feet, and they will get bigger with time. But very, very stately, quintessential tree of the South. And again, why not? Beautiful foliage, nice texture, fragrant blooms. There's just all kinds of great things to say about it. And that's also one of the reasons we have so many varieties. I often like to put this little image up because I think it's interesting that it's been decided that this tree is not native. At one time, this was thought to be a tree that was native to Virginia, but really because we don't have good documentation on it, now we're thinking, hey, it doesn't appear that it existed here until people started to introduce it from further south. So absolutely, as you go down into the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, this is a southern tree. We can grow them up here. We are at sort of their northernmost limits in terms of cold hardiness. But again, plant breeding, we have developed more cold hardy plants. Our temperatures, our winters don't get as severe, and we have very, very good success with them in our area now. What's happened, again, because everybody has this love affair with such a lovely tree, there's tons of varieties out there. These are just some that I put out there. A lot of this was trying to find smaller versions of it because of the space limitations we have in more urban, suburban gardens. So Alta is a very upright grower. So Alta will grow tall, 25, 30 feet tall, certainly, but it's a very narrow columnar one. So a lot of times we're in a situation where, hey, you can grow up, that's fine. I just don't have the room for you to grow out. So Alta might be one that we look at for that. Little Gem became kind of a standby for many years because of beautiful plant, nice density in it. It did stay smaller, prolific bloomer, all these good things. But I should say, when we talk about, if we use the word dwarf or small in the plant version, that means smaller than the parent. So if the parent plant, if you just say Southern Magnolia, 90 feet tall over a long enough time, not unusual, 90 feet tall, 40 feet wide is possible. But if Little Gem peeks out and says, hey, only grows to be 30 feet tall and 18 feet wide, we call that little, relative term. So that may not be little in your vocabulary, but it is in the plant vocabulary. So then along comes Teddy Bear, which you can see smaller, more compact, and right now it's probably the smallest of the varieties I'm aware of. This is probably going to, top out more like, staying under 15 feet tall and probably, stay less than 8 feet wide. Again, all this being relative with time, and we would discuss with you exactly the placement. I would rather look further out and give them extra room because we know that they continue to grow and we want them to keep growing, maybe even after we're gone. Uh, Talk about hollies. Again, there's, I think, over 300 species of hollies worldwide. So big, diverse group of plants. They also readily hybridize within themselves. Here, we're probably more in the northernmost region for hollies. As you go further north into colder climates, they become less and less prevalent. But the American holly, you can see there is, again, pretty much indigenous throughout the entire state, and even down through the southeast, and I think even down into Central America and so on. So our American holly, beautiful, stately plant, not as well known in the landscape trade, really because they tended to be slower growing and a little bit more of an olive green color to them. So we tend to gravitate more towards hybrids with the English hollies and so on for darker green color and qualities like that. But again, because of the acknowledgement that our native plants are a necessary component of having a functional ecosystem, and we have to bring them back in there to maintain a functional ecosystem and look at our gardens more as a part of that ecosystem and the food chain. So the American hollies are making a resurgence back in here. So you look at Cedar Hill, this is just, again, it's a cultivar. It's a popular variety of American holly, but it tends to have a tighter form, more upright growth habit, and maybe a darker green color that's in there. So that's what we do as horticulturists. We take these plants and we say, oh, hey, these are great plants, but what can I do to kind of tweak it to sort of meet what my goals or my objectives are in there? So we looked at a lot of these different evergreens for different uses, particularly talked a lot about putting them in screening that's there. And there's so many more to choose from. Thing I want to emphasize though is each one of these we talk about saying, oh, well, it gets this pest or it gets that disease or it's susceptible to storm damage or it's susceptible to cold damage. Each plant is going to have its own unique qualities. And if we plant a monoculture, like a lot of these slides you saw where you saw, hey, I'm gonna plant emerald green arborvitae. It's wonderful. And I plant a row of 40 emerald green arborvitae. But guess what? When the deer find them, that's 40 different plants that they're going to browse on. If I plant a row of Leyland cypress, they were functional and they did a really great job until one winter they get loaded up when half of them go down together. So it's just never a good idea for us to have a monoculture. We always want to have a diverse collection of plants that's in there from so many different reasons. So we don't lose everything, just practical terms, to one storm event or, one pest issue or outbreak that goes on. It also just adds a lot more visual interest to have a more diverse selection of plants that's in there. It also gives us a more diverse habitat that can in turn support a more diverse community of plants and insects and more diverse life. So this little image, I start to show an idea of, hey, this is Nellie Stevens. Nellie Stevens is like one of my favorite hollies of all times. It's a Chinese and English hybrid. So there's nothing native about, but it's robust, it's full, it's dark green. It's a great sturdy go-to plant. It grows fast and big, but that becomes a part of our screen. And then we have the emerald green arborvitaes back in there. We can't see it, but there's also yews in here. But when we're doing it, this is just sort of a general rule. There's not even a whole lot of research to tell us what is ideal, but it's kind of a starting point to say that we want to mix this up. And if we're doing a large planting, especially, that we really want to limit ourselves to no more than 10% of one species or 20% of one genera and no more than 30% from the same family. You don't need to follow this or even fully grasp it. But the thing is, just get the point through is, let's mix it up. It's always more attractive if I can have, you can imagine if this was, Cryptomeria mixed in here with the Nellie Stevens hollies, maybe even consider putting a magnolia in there along with some green giant arborvitae and so on. It would be a more interesting, more functional it would provide us just a better all-around screening and landscape that's in there. So I see this. This is still kind of the standard kind of way that we design landscapes. I just keep hoping we'll move away from that and start really just mixing up a more diverse collection of plants. It's hard to find good examples, but this is one that's pretty close to my home. And this you can see was what they did. Nellie Stevens holly, green giant arborvitae. We're looking here. These are viburnums, an evergreen viburnum that's in there. So it's a much more diverse collection of plants. One of the things I like is they space them appropriately so these plants would have time to grow. This picture is kind of misleading, but these utility lines are behind the screening plants. These trees are not growing in the right away for the utility line. They're pulled back from it, so we don't have that kind of conflict in there. And then I went back there on Monday to take current pictures. So that was my 2020. Here it is, 2024. It's really doing the job. It's providing that screening. It's still growing and it's still maturing, but I just love to see if we could get more of this kind of concept going on. This is the same landscape that's in there. Looking at for 2020, looking at where we are now, 2024. So with that, I have talked too much. I want to see if we have any questions, comments come in. If you don't, I have more slides, more pictures, but I don't care if we get to those at all or not. I'd rather just hear from you.
Thanks, David. All right, everybody, please feel free to type those questions in, and I'll start with the ones that we've received during the presentation. David, the first question goes back to bagworms. The question is, when you remove the bagworms, how do you destroy them?
Uh, you, you can squish them. You can just throw them out with the trash. You'll put something. I don't understand. Sometimes people feel like they have to burn stuff or soak it in gasoline. Let's not go there. I think we're under fire watch today, so there's just really no need to go to that extent. What you would find, half of those cocoons or more might even just be empty, and we can dispose of them. But half of them may have eggs in it, so I don't really want to put it in the compost because then they could just perpetuate it's in there. Just put them out in the landfill or shred them, squish them, like I said. But yeah, let's not do any of the burning or anything drastic.
Okay. Our next question is about Eastern red cedar. Is it possible to keep an Eastern red cedar pruned to a height of 5 feet high by 2 feet wide? It's self-seeded next to my house.
Probably not a good idea. I mean, what you're doing is if it's self-seeded, it's just going to be a native one that wants to grow to be, 20 to 30 feet tall, and then you're fighting the plants the way I see it, trying to keep it 5 foot tall. You could do that, I guess, for a while. It's something you want to maintain because we can only do the pruning just lightly out here in the green tips where the growth is. If you wanted to do that, I would probably do my pruning around March time period, do kind of a light shearing on it, try to do that, lightly to maintain its size. And at some point in time, it's probably the plant will sort of wear out in a sense because it doesn't have as much photosynthetic material. You might wear out because the minute you stop pruning, it's going to get bigger. So I can't tell you don't do it, but long term, it's not really a very compatible thing. Nothing I would really recommend.
Okay. Next question. Are there any magnolia shrubs for the magnolia lovers?
I the the smallest one I know of is that teddy bear, which I don't think we can really call a shrub. There are people that know more about the varieties. The people who actually work out in our tree and shrub section. Don't ever hesitate to call or ask. I could be wrong on that, but that I know of, we're talking about that evergreen southern magnolia. The answer is no. Our native magnolia, there is one they call, I think I want to say something like sugar baby. I was looking into that a little bit. It's a fairly new introduction. It's our native Magnolia virginiana that sheds its leaves in the wintertime. But you might look into that one. I can't remember. It's like sugar baby, sugar shack, something like that. And
Okay.
it's like more of a shrub form.
Okay. Next question. Green giant. Oh, we have another one on magnolia. I'll ask that one. Is it too late to plant a magnolia this year?
No, I think you can plant a magnolia. I am less concerned about cold weather. There used to be questions regarding their winter hardiness, their cold hardiness, but as our winters get warmer and the plants get sturdier, I'm less concerned about that. Most winter damage with magnolias is because of desiccation, because they dried out. So I would plant it in an area where it's a little bit sheltered from very cold wind. I don't want the winds to desiccate or dry it out. So it means other trees or landforms or structures, something so it doesn't get the full force of wind. And you must be prepared to keep it watered if we don't get the water. So a lot of people I'm advising at this time of year, like just have a reality check with them, let them know that you have to be prepared to water. If you're not, if you're traveling, if you're going away, if you don't want to deal with hand carrying water out there, then let's just put it off. So it's kind of a qualified, yes, you can plant them now, but with those precautions in mind.
Okay. All right, back to green giants now. How do we space green giants for screening? First question. Second question, do we need to fertilize and when?
So the spacing is a real dilemma. What I always do, and we've talked about this, is think in terms of time frames. Just a little personal story. So in 2000, yeah, I'm trying to get my years. Yeah. So yeah, around, I guess it was around 2000, I had bought a property and house and I was planting my forever garden and I planted green giant arborvitae about, I think like 15 feet on center, right? Because I was going to be there forever. I'm planning for the next several decades ahead. Well, I lived in the house for about 3 years and left. So that never happened. So if I'm looking at kind of like the long-term lifetime thing, yeah, I might put them 15 feet apart. But I also know that, hey, I want to get some privacy going and I'm not going to live forever. So maybe I would put them like, 8 or 10 feet apart. But that would be to me kind of close spacing would be kind of like that 8 to 10 feet, which I'm almost uncomfortable with. If you went 15 feet apart, that's like my style, but not everybody's got the kind of patience that I have. So you got to work out kind of where your balance is in there. 12 feet may not be a bad compromise. Oh yeah,
Okay, okay.
oh, so fertilizer, it's to me, I always say it's like taking a vitamin pill. You may or may not take a vitamin pill. It's not life or death. It's not crucial, but your plants will perform better with it. So if I have, especially if I have a young plants, let's say I just planted some small green giants, I want them to get big and I'm trying to push them to get some privacy and screening on there, I would probably fertilize it maybe sometime in March or early April, right at the beginning of the season. And I might come back and fertilize it again, sort of the end of May or June. This is to try and push additional growth on them. And again, I'm keeping up my commitment towards watering. So once or twice a year, but it really depends on what your goals are. This isn't critical for the plant's health. It has more to do with what we're trying to achieve with them.
Okay. So if you're planting those green giants and you plant them a little closer together, can you trim them and keep them the right size, or does that end up?
Again, there's a yes and no answer because these conifers, like I keep saying, if you can imagine, I'm a conifer, I'm this big, right? My growth is out here in these green tips. And like I said, each year in fall, they shed their interior branches. So if you look on the
Hmm,
conifers, the inside of the tree here is bald and the green is out here. So my pruning, I can prune them out here in the green part and they'll regenerate. But if I lose that green part, I cannot prune them back here into the bald area, or I just have a bald spot that's there. So it's something you have to maintain, is why I'm saying. So you're just setting yourself up. You can do this, but you're creating a maintenance thing for yourself, which is why I try to avoid that and select a more appropriate plant selection.
gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Next question. Are there any conifers that will do well in more shade than sun? So conifers for shade.
Not so much in the tree department, but I think one of the best you can look at is what's called a Japanese plum yew, Cephalotaxis. It looks like a yew. It's got the kind of soft needled evergreen. They're very shade tolerant, quite drought tolerant after their roots are established. And there are some of them, like the upright ones, that I think you can easily go, 6, 8 feet tall if you just want a little enclosure. As far as evergreen trees to put in the shade, somewhat very qualified thing. I'll say American hollies. I don't like to do it. American hollies are probably the most shade tolerant evergreen tree, but they're going to be thin. They're going to be sparse. They may not live up to your expectations.
Okay, okay. Next question. Let's see here. Is there a point at which we no longer need to fertilize large established evergreens?
Uh, the way I look at this, plants can basically get the minerals they need out of the soil, right? If the soil, our soils tend to be very high mineral content, high nutrient value. If the plant appears to be healthy, I don't see any signs of nutrient deficiency and it's growing normally, it doesn't require fertilization. Also, as a tree gets older, their growth tends to slow down, so they don't need as much fertilizer. It's in there. But here's the deal. We put them into stressful or harsh environments. If I see signs of a nutrient deficiency, if there's like some obvious cause or target, then I think it makes sense to do that. A soil test is a good way to answer that question. If you want a definitive answer, actually, we have the kits available. You can take soil sample under the canopy tree, send it down. They can do a nutrient analysis and determine what's in there, and it will also give you recommendations of what needs to be replenished.
Okay. All righty. Next question. I'm starting to think I need to get my glasses checked. I need I need screening evergreens. What is the narrowest full evergreen that would not create shading in our neighbor's yard? Can the green giant, okay, so I think we already addressed this. Can the green giant be pruned to keep it narrow? So they're just looking for a narrow screening evergreen.
Um, I would totally tell you to look at green giant. I also forgot to mention there's other varieties out there now. There's like a golden giant. There's also kind of an oxymoron, a junior giant. If you're looking for something, you'll stay smaller. So something in that collection are very good, sturdy, reliable plants. And that I mentioned it doesn't have to be the green giant. There's some that will stay a little bit smaller than that. There's a juniper that's real skinny. It's called Troutman, Trautman. That might be one to look at, but it's so skinny, I don't know if it's going to actually give you the kind of the screening effect that you're after. But you should stop by and look at both of those.
Okay, okay. Next question is about a green giant too. My neighbor planted green giants close together. What can I expect them to look like over time?
So this is the problem that happens once they start growing in together like this. They start coming in contact with each other. It's the competition for sunlight. They start shading each other out. And where the sun doesn't get, because again, plants require sunlight. That's how they produce food for themselves. It starts browning, shedding, thinning out, and eventually kind of the whole thing starts going in decline. It's a difficult thing to address once it's happened. So we try to really think about that more at the time of planting or installation. I was talking to the customer in some detail who had planted literally 70 green giant arborvitae, 6 foot spacing between them 3 years ago. Now he's at that point where they're growing into each other and asking about transplanting every other one of them out of there. I'm just saying this, I just see problems all over the scene on this, because if he wants to transplant them out of there, he's going to be injuring the root system on each of its neighbors that's there. There's just a whole host of things could be going wrong. I talked to him about just cutting every other one down, but he doesn't want to sacrifice half of his trees. So yeah, what you can expect to happen is they will just start to thin out, brown out, and with less foliage, less photosynthesis, they'll eventually kind of go into gradual decline, at which point
Okay.
they're just sparse, thin, not doing their job.
Alrighty. Can you talk about options for dwarf conifers?
Oh, there's so many in there. I didn't really give fair share to I'll put my favorite one out there. I'll be biased. What we call Chamaecyparis. This is a real dwarf one for like little miniature gardens. With Chamaecyparis, this group of plants, or there's another one, it's mirror image on this back here. So these Chamaecyparis are they're what's called false cypress. Most of them are of Asian origin, but you can get the yellow colorations, the green colorations, get all these kind of cool forms that's in there. I think they make wonderful specimen plants. I've also had really good success with them as far as being easy, resilient, pest-free. Um, Occasional deer browsing on it. I still don't consider that a big problem, but something you might be considered with. Again, I find like these Chamaecyparis, a little more resilient, like pine, spruce, fir, the needled evergreens. They can be really cool and durable, but like I said, once they start to lose their growing tips, if there's a problem where you need to prune them, they're just not as resilient. But there's some really cool ones there. But this group of plants becomes my go-to, and you can do some fun pruning with them if you want to sculpt them and give them a little bit of a bonsai look.
Okay, okay. Next question. My cryptomeria drop a lot of small, short branches. Is this characteristic of a healthy specimen? Otherwise, the trees look healthy. They were planted over 20 years ago and have filled out nicely. They're rarely fertilized and are watered during dry periods.
They will shed their interior branchlets. So this is just what I was talking about. Is like on evergreens, as those branchlets mature, because they don't have, it's not deciduous. They don't shed leaves, but little branchlets and needles and everything will shed on the interior. So cryptomeria, yes, especially on the old one. Every one you look at, if you open it up, you'll find that on the interior. If it's out on the tips of the branches, if it's the new growth that's there, then I'm going to ask you bring pictures and samples to our plant clinic. There are a couple pest issues that could cause that if you're getting dieback in the tips. But if it's on the
Okay.
inside, it's normal.
We just got a question about this, and there's no way I can spell it. Can you spell Chamaecyparis? I just like I Googled it real quick and I think I've got it because it's got a whole lot of letters, but
So
I don't.
yeah, I'll say so common name, they're what would be called a Hinoki cypress. So Hinoki. Botanically, the Chamaecyparis is one of those weird things like because it's actually
Is it
Chamecyparis.
okay? Yeah, I Googled it. It's Chamaecyparis.
Yeah, so
Does that sound right? Yeah.
it's not like checkers and it's not pronounced. It's it's not Chessiparus, it's Chamaecyparis.
Yeah.
Spelling and the sound is very different.
That's one of those when I'm with Peg and trying to spell out names for everybody. I'm like, I'll send that out in the notes later. I'll put that in the chat for people who are interested in that.
Yeah, but that's a group of plants that goes all the way from these. And I'm the only guy I have like these. I buy these little things because I love watching them grow, and I buy these little things and they grow half of an inch a year, and then they'll get the size, and I'll move them out to a different place in my garden. So even my little
That's
tiny
so fun.
bag.
All right, this is our last question. Last question, David. Oh no, sorry, we've got a couple more. That's fine. We've got time. How can I reduce short branch die off? Do you know what that is? I'm not. I short branch die off.
Not familiar with that. Do we know what type of plant?
If you can type what plant is and give us a little information about that plant, I'll relay the info to the customer. This person's anonymous, so I don't know who that is.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like Leyland cypress or something, they'll get what's called Ceridium canker that leads to some branch dieback, and there's no treatment for that. You just have to cut out the dead stuff.
Okay. Um, every year I lose one soft touch holly. They're all grown in the same area and treated the same. I just took a soil sample. The branches die back and they turn a bit yellow, losing the green dark color. Do you have any suggestions?
Oh, I got a bunch of ideas on that. Not exactly answers. So one thing I'll say is soil sample is going to give you the nutrition and pH of the soil, and that's good information to have. It's not going to help you as far as diagnosing a disease problem or something. With Japanese hollies, sometimes they do get a disease called black root rot. It's pretty common. It can lead to symptoms there. Sometimes they get a disease called Botchus canker, which is more of a branch by branch dieback. I also kind of have this idea that sometimes these slow growing cultivars, because they're bred to be less vigorous, that they also are less resilient and sometimes don't get to live as long. And I'm going to add into that equation with Japanese hollies. Sounds like you're not even getting is what to me, if I get 25, 35 years of good life out of a Japanese holly, I've done well. They don't just seem to live quite as long. So I just put a bunch of ideas out there, but I think if you can bring pictures and some samples to the plant clinic, it could be cultural, it could be disease, and we just need to look at that in a little more detail.
Okay. All right, that's it for our questions. Again, everybody, if you guys have it, we have one more. Okay. Cryptomer This is for Cryptomera. I think the issue, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I think the issue is that we're not familiar with short branch die off. So the question is, it's Cryptomeria. Does that ring a bell?
The only thing I can think of is like they, like I said, if they do have that interior browning, that will cause it. If you're losing actual branches on there, I'm going to ask that you look really closely at it, see if there's any sap weeping or oozing out of that branch. Not often, but on some occasions, they'll get a fungal infection, again, we call cytospora canker, and that manifests itself where you start to see sap oozing or weeping out of that particular location, and then the branch dies. If that's what we're dealing with, all we can do is cut that branch off. The sprays, the fungicides, and treatments don't help with it.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully that helps. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for attending today. If you have any questions after the class, please feel free to contact the plant clinic. You can contact David Yost, send us an email. There are multiple ways to get in touch with the team, and we're happy to help you all out. The recording will be available tomorrow, usually about 24 hours following the class, so about 2, 3 p.m. David, do you have anything you want to wrap up with?
I want to suggest, because it seems like we've talked more about some diagnostic things today. We're, on Zoom, I'm giving you my best guess based on what I see at the clinic. But if you are ever able to visit us, what we really want is if you can take a picture of the plant so we get to see the overall plant and kind of the pattern of damage that's up there, a close-up of the damaged or abnormal part, and also bring us a sample of it. Because if we're looking for mites, scale, pathogens, we'll actually want to put that in the microscope. But having the picture both far away and up close gives us good information on the general pattern and distribution. And we get to talk to you, which gives more information. So it's a free service. We're there every day of the week. Please come in and visit us anytime.
That definitely. All right. Well, thank you, David. As always, thank you everybody for attending, and we will see you next time. Have a good afternoon.